Sarah Martinez had
We
grown
can't really need
accustomed
to
to being
reconsider our
invisible.
strategy.
At
The
32,
current
she had
approach isn't
perfected the
yielding the
art
results
of
we need.
blending into the background, moving through her days at the Department of Veterans Affairs like a shadow that nobody bothered to acknowledge. Her small cubicle sat in the far corner of the fourth floor, tucked away behind filing cabinets and forgotten storage boxes, as if the building itself conspired to hide her from view. Every morning at precisely 7:30, Sarah would arrive at the Richmond, Virginia Medical Center, her worn leather bag slung over her shoulder, containing the same lunch she packed every day and the stack of case files that never seemed to diminish. She would nod politely to the security guard, who barely glanced up from his newspaper, and make her way to the elevator bank where other employees stood checking their phones or discussing weekend plans in clusters that never seemed to include her. The elevator rides were particularly telling. Sarah would step inside, press the button for the fourth floor, and watch as conversations continued around her as if she weren't there. Colleagues would discuss important meetings she hadn't been invited to, policy changes she learned about secondhand, and workplace gossip that painted a picture of an office social hierarchy in which she didn't even register as a participant. Her supervisor, Margaret Chun, was a woman who seemed to view Sarah as a necessary piece of office equipment rather than a human being. Their interactions were limited to terse emails about deadlines and the occasional hallway encounter where Margaret would assign additional tasks without making eye contact. Sarah had worked under Margaret for 3 years, yet she was certain her supervisor couldn't accurately describe her appearance or recall a single personal detail about her life. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she worked in an office dedicated to serving veterans, people who had sacrificed for their country and deserved recognition and support, while she herself felt completely unseen and unvalued. Her job involved processing disability claims, a task that required careful attention to detail and genuine empathy for the veterans whose lives hung in the balance of bureaucratic decisions. She took pride in her work, often staying late to ensure that claims were processed accurately and efficiently, but her dedication went unnoticed by those around her. Sarah's colleagues treated her with the kind of polite indifference typically reserved for background noise. During team meetings, she would sit in her usual spot at the back of the conference room, taking notes and occasionally offering suggestions that were either ignored or attributed to someone else minutes later. She had learned to speak softly, almost apologetically, as if apologizing for taking up space in a world that seemed designed for louder, more confident voices. The break room interactions were perhaps the most painful reminders of her invisible status. Sarah would enter to refill her coffee cup and find herself in the middle of conversations that would pause awkwardly until she left, not because she was unwelcome, but because people simply forgot she was capable of contributing to discussions about anything beyond work-related matters. Birthday celebrations happened around her, holiday parties were planned without her input, and office pools for various events somehow never made it to her desk. Her workspace reflected this isolation. While other cubicles were decorated with family photos, inspirational quotes, and personal mementos that invited conversation, Sarah's remained sterile and professional. She had tried, early in her tenure, to personalize her space with a small plant and a framed photo of her grandmother, but the lack of interest from passers-by had gradually convinced her that such efforts were pointless. The plant had died from neglect during a particularly busy period, and she never replaced it. Sarah's educational background should have commanded respect. She held a master's degree in social work from Virginia Commonwealth University and had specialized training in trauma counseling, qualifications that made her exceptionally suited for working with veterans. However, in an office culture that seemed to value networking and self-promotion over competence, her expertise remained largely untapped. She had written several detailed reports on improving the claims process, suggestions that could have saved the department significant time and resources, but these documents remained buried in Margaret's inbox, acknowledged with brief thank you emails that felt more dismissive than appreciative. The personal cost of this professional invisibility extended far beyond the office walls. Sarah found herself questioning her worth and capabilities in ways that affected every aspect of her life. She had moved to Richmond 5 years earlier, hoping for a fresh start after a difficult divorce, but had struggled to build meaningful relationships in a new city while feeling so diminished in her professional environment. Her social circle was virtually non-existent, partly due to her natural introversion, but largely because her confidence had been so eroded by years of being overlooked that she had begun to believe she truly had nothing valuable to offer. Her small apartment in the Fan District was a reflection of this internal struggle. Sparsely furnished and meticulously clean, it felt more like a temporary stopping place than a home. Sarah would return each evening, heat up a simple dinner, and spend her evenings reading or watching documentaries about historical figures who had overcome adversity. She drew inspiration from stories of people who had been underestimated or marginalized, but had ultimately found ways to make their mark on the world, though she struggled to envision how such transformation might be possible in her own life. Weekends were particularly challenging. Without the structure of work, even work where she felt invisible, Sarah often found herself overwhelmed by the silence of her own thoughts and the absence of meaningful human connection. She would venture out to grocery stores or coffee shops, observing families and groups of friends with a mixture of longing and resignation. Occasionally, she would visit the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, where she could lose herself in the stories told through paintings and sculptures, finding solace in art created by people who had also sought to be seen and understood. The veterans whose cases crossed Sarah's desk became, in many ways, her most meaningful relationships. Through their files, she learned about their struggles, their sacrifices, and their hopes for recognition and support. She would spend extra time researching precedents that might help their cases, making phone calls to clarify requirements, and crafting detailed reports that presented their situations in the most favorable light possible. These veterans never knew her name or face, but she felt a deep connection to their desire to be acknowledged and valued for their service. One particularly poignant case involved a Vietnam veteran named Robert Thompson, whose claim for PTSD benefits had been denied twice due to insufficient documentation. Sarah had spent weeks researching his unit's service record, tracking down witnesses, and compiling evidence that ultimately led to the approval of his claim. When she called to inform him of the decision, the gratitude in his voice had moved her to tears. For a brief moment, she had felt truly valuable, truly seen, even though the recognition came from someone who would never know the person behind the bureaucratic process that had changed his life. These small victories sustained Sarah through the daily experience of professional invisibility, but they also highlighted the disconnect between her capabilities and how others perceived her. She knew she was skilled at her job, compassionate in her approach, and dedicated to making a difference in veterans' lives. Yet somehow, these qualities failed to translate into recognition or advancement within her own workplace. The organizational structure at the VA seemed designed to perpetuate this invisibility. Promotions were often based on visibility rather than competence, with those who spoke loudest in meetings and maintained high profiles in interdepartmental committees rising through the ranks regardless of their actual effectiveness. Sarah watched colleagues with less experience and fewer qualifications receive opportunities she could only dream of, not because they were necessarily more talented, but because they understood the importance of self-advocacy in ways that felt foreign and uncomfortable to her. Margaret Chun represented everything Sarah struggled to understand about workplace politics. A woman who spoke with unwavering confidence about subjects she seemed to know little about. Margaret had risen to her supervisory position through a combination of strategic networking and carefully calculated visibility. She attended every optional meeting, volunteered for high-profile committees, and had cultivated relationships with senior administrators that translated into career advancement. Her actual management skills were questionable at best, but her ability to position herself as indispensable was masterful. The irony was that Sarah possessed many of the qualities that should have made her successful in a veterans services environment. Her empathy was genuine rather than performative, her attention to detail was meticulous, and her commitment to the mission was unwavering. She understood trauma and its lasting effects, could navigate complex bureaucratic systems with ease, and had the patience and persistence necessary to advocate effectively for veterans' needs. Yet in an office culture that prioritized image over substance, these strengths became invisible assets that contributed to her overall invisibility. As months turned into years, Sarah found herself trapped in a cycle of diminishing expectations and increasing isolation. Each day brought new reminders of her peripheral status, from being excluded from important email chains to having her ideas credited to others without acknowledgement. She began to question whether she was somehow responsible for her situation, wondering if there was something fundamentally wrong with her approach or her personality that made her forgettable to others. The psychological impact of sustained invisibility was profound. Sarah began to speak even more softly, to apologize more frequently for normal workplace interactions, and to second-guess her professional judgment in ways that further undermined her confidence. She would rehearse simple conversations before having them, anticipating dismissal or indifference, and often found her expectations fulfilled in ways that reinforced her negative self-perception. Despite these challenges, Sarah maintained her commitment to the veterans she served. Their cases provided her with a sense of purpose that transcended her personal struggles with recognition. She knew that behind every file was a person who had served their country and deserved better than bureaucratic delays and administrative indifference. This knowledge kept her motivated to continue her work with the same dedication and thoroughness that characterized her approach from the beginning. The Richmond, Virginia Medical Center buzzed with activity that reflected its importance as a major healthcare facility serving thousands of veterans across central Virginia. Yet within this bustling environment, Sarah moved like a ghost, essential to the functioning of the system, but invisible to those around her. Her contribution was measurable in the lives improved by her careful work, but unmeasured by any system of recognition or advancement within her organization. As Sarah prepared for what she assumed would be just another ordinary day in her extraordinary anonymity, she had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. The forces that had kept her invisible for so long were about to be challenged by someone whose own experience with service and sacrifice would allow him to see what others had missed. The stage was set for a recognition that would transform not only Sarah's life, but also the lives of countless veterans who benefited from her unseen dedication. The morning of October 15th began like any other for Sarah Martinez. She arrived at the Richmond, Virginia Medical Center at her usual time, badged into the building, and made her way to the elevator bank where a handful of early arrivals were gathering for the start of another busy day. The conversations around her followed familiar patterns, discussions about weekend activities she hadn't participated in, references to social events she hadn't been invited to, and casual workplace banter that flowed around her as if she were invisible. What Sarah didn't know was that 3 floors above her, in the executive conference room, a meeting was taking place that would soon ripple through the entire facility. General Patricia Williams, a 4-star Air Force general serving as the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs, had arrived in Richmond for an unscheduled inspection visit. Her presence at the facility was known only to the hospital director and a handful of senior administrators, part of a new initiative to conduct surprise assessments of VA facilities across the country. General Williams was not a typical bureaucrat. At 58, she had spent 35 years in military service before transitioning to her current role in Veterans Affairs. Her career had been marked by a series of groundbreaking achievements, including being the first woman to command a major Air Force logistics wing and the first female general officer to oversee international humanitarian operations in Southeast Asia. She understood service, sacrifice, and the often invisible contributions that kept complex organizations functioning effectively. The general's inspection philosophy was rooted in her military experience, where she had learned that the most critical insights about an organization's true effectiveness often came from observing frontline operations rather than reviewing polished presentations from senior staff. She had a particular talent for identifying the people who actually made things work, the unsung heroes whose contributions were essential but often overlooked by traditional recognition systems. Margaret Chun was in full crisis management mode, having been informed of the general's visit only an hour before her arrival. She bustled through the 4th floor, issuing rapid-fire instructions to her staff about presentation protocols and proper conduct during the inspection. Her anxiety was palpable as she realized that her department's performance would be scrutinized by someone whose opinion could significantly impact her career trajectory. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on those observing Margaret's frantic preparations. This was the same supervisor who had spent 3 years treating her staff with casual indifference, suddenly desperate to present an image of engaged leadership and effective management. Her instructions focused heavily on appearance and protocol rather than the substance of the work being performed, reflecting her fundamental misunderstanding of what someone with General Williams' background would find impressive. Sarah remained focused on her work throughout the morning commotion, processing claims with her usual thoroughness while her colleagues buzzed with nervous energy about the impending inspection. She had learned not to invest emotional energy in workplace drama that didn't directly affect her ability to serve veterans, a philosophical approach that had protected her from disappointment, but had also contributed to her isolation from office dynamics. General Williams began her facility tour with the standard administrative briefings, politely listening to presentations about patient satisfaction scores, budget allocations, and strategic initiatives while mentally noting the disconnect between the polished PowerPoint slides and the facility's actual operational challenges. Her years of experience had taught her to read between the lines of institutional presentations, recognizing when substance was being overshadowed by style. By mid-morning, the general had grown restless with conference room presentations and requested to observe actual operations throughout the facility. Her escort team, led by the hospital director, scrambled to accommodate this request while maintaining the carefully choreographed nature of the visit. They had planned to show her the most visually impressive departments, places where patient interactions were visible and staff could demonstrate clear service delivery. The fourth-floor claims processing department was not on the original tour schedule. It was considered back-office administration, the kind of behind-the-scenes work that didn't translate well to inspirational photo opportunities or compelling anecdotes for stakeholder presentations. However, General Williams had specifically requested to see where disability claims were processed, recognizing this function as critical to veterans' quality of life despite its lack of glamour. Margaret Shun received 15 minutes notice that the inspection party would be visiting her department. Her response was characteristic of her management style, a flurry of superficial preparations designed to create an impression of efficiency rather than actually improving operations. She instructed her staff to organize their desks, prepare talking points about their work, and be ready to discuss their contributions to the department's mission. Sarah received the same instructions as everyone else, but interpreted them differently. Rather than cleaning her already organized workspace or preparing self-promotional talking points, she simply continued processing claims with the same methodical care she applied to her work every day. Her approach was informed by her belief that the best way to honor a visiting official was to demonstrate genuine dedication to serving veterans rather than staging a performance. When General Williams entered the claims processing department, she was greeted by Margaret Chin's practice presentation about the team's performance metrics, processing timelines, and quality assurance procedures. The general listened politely while scanning the workspace, her trained eye taking in details that revealed the actual functioning of the department beyond the supervisor's scripted overview. What caught General Williams' attention immediately was the obvious disconnect between Margaret's confident presentation and the reality of the workspace itself. While Margaret spoke about collaboration and team effectiveness, the general observed a department where most staff members appeared nervous and uncertain, clearly more focused on managing the impression they were making than on the work they were performing. Sarah's corner workspace was visible from the department entrance, though partially obscured by filing cabinets and storage equipment. While her colleagues fidgeted with papers and prepared talking points, she remained focused on her computer screen, carefully reviewing a complex disability claim that required detailed analysis of medical documentation and service records. Her concentration was so complete that she seemed unaware of the commotion surrounding the inspection visit. General Williams excused herself from Margaret's presentation and began walking through the department, stopping at individual workstations to speak with staff members about their responsibilities and experiences. Her approach was informal and genuine, the kind of interaction that put people at ease while revealing authentic information about their work environment and organizational culture. The conversations she had with various staff members confirmed her initial impression that this department suffered from the kind of leadership deficit she had encountered throughout her career, situations where supervisors focused on managing appearances rather than developing their people or optimizing operations. The employees were competent and well-intentioned, but they lacked the kind of purposeful direction that characterized high-performing organizations. As General Williams moved through the department, she noticed that Margaret Shun was shadowing her closely, obviously anxious to maintain control over the interactions and ensure that conversations remained within acceptable parameters. This behavior itself was revealing, suggesting a management style based on control rather than confidence in her team's capabilities and commitment. The general's attention was drawn to Sarah's workspace partly because it was the only area where genuine work seemed to be continuing despite the inspection. While others had abandoned their tasks to prepare for potential conversations with the visiting official, Sarah remained engaged with her computer screen, occasionally referencing paper documents and making notations that suggested careful analytical work. Margaret Shun attempted to redirect General Williams away from Sarah's corner, suggesting that there were other areas of the department that would be more interesting and relevant to the inspection. Her nervousness about this particular staff member was obvious, though she tried to disguise it as concern for the general's time and priorities. This behavior only heightened General Williams' interest in understanding what was happening in that forgotten corner of the office. The general approached Sarah's cubicle quietly, taking a moment to observe her work before announcing her presence. What she saw was a level of focus and attention to detail that was markedly different from what she had observed elsewhere in the department. Sarah was cross-referencing multiple documents, taking careful notes, and reviewing regulations with the kind of thoroughness that suggested genuine commitment to accuracy rather than mere compliance with processing quotas. Sarah's desk, while lacking the personal touches that characterized other workspaces, was meticulously organized in a way that reflected professional competence and efficiency. Her case files were arranged systematically, her reference materials were easily accessible, and her computer screen displayed multiple windows showing research into precedents and regulations relevant to the case she was handling. When General Williams cleared her throat softly to announce her presence, Sarah looked up with surprise rather than the nervous anticipation that had characterized her colleagues' reactions. Her response was natural and unguarded, reflecting someone who was genuinely focused on her work rather than managing impressions for a visiting dignitary. The general introduced herself simply, without emphasizing her rank or position, and asked Sarah about the case she was reviewing. Sarah's response was immediate and detailed, explaining that she was working on a complex PTSD claim for a Gulf War veteran whose previous applications had been denied due to insufficient documentation of service-connected trauma. What struck General Williams immediately was the depth of Sarah's knowledge and the obvious personal investment she had in achieving a positive outcome for the veteran. Sarah explained the challenges she was facing in documenting the veteran's case, the research she had conducted into similar situations, and the advocacy strategies she was employing to present the strongest possible application for benefits approval. As Sarah described her work, General Williams realized she was witnessing something remarkable, a civil servant who understood the true mission of Veterans Affairs and was pursuing it with the kind of dedication and expertise that could transform individual lives. Sarah's approach wasn't limited to processing paperwork. She was actively investigating ways to help veterans navigate a complex system and receive the benefits they had earned through their service. The conversation revealed that Sarah had been working on this particular case for weeks, investing her own time in research that went far beyond basic job requirements. She had contacted former unit members to gather testimony, researched medical precedents that might support the veteran's claim, and compiled documentation that presented the most compelling possible argument for benefits approval. Margaret Chun hovered nervously at the edge of this conversation, clearly uncomfortable with the attention Sarah was receiving but uncertain about how to redirect the general's focus without appearing controlling or dismissive. Her anxiety was evident in her body language and frequent attempts to interject comments about departmental procedures and performance metrics. General Williams ignored Margaret's interruptions, finding herself increasingly impressed by Sarah's expertise and dedication. As someone who had spent her career in service to others, she recognized genuine commitment when she saw it, and Sarah's approach to her work demonstrated the kind of values and effectiveness that made organizations truly successful. The complexity of the case Sarah was handling became more apparent as she explained the various challenges involved in documenting PTSD claims for veterans whose service had occurred decades earlier. Her knowledge of regulations, precedents, and advocacy strategies was encyclopedic, suggesting years of experience and continuous learning that had been invested in mastering her craft. What made Sarah's work even more impressive was the obvious personal connection she felt to the veterans she served. She spoke about their cases not as abstract administrative tasks, but as opportunities to ensure that people who had sacrificed for their country received the recognition and support they deserved. Her empathy was genuine and informed, based on deep understanding of military service and its lasting impacts. General Williams found herself asking increasingly detailed questions about Sarah's approach to case management, her knowledge of veterans' issues, and her experience working within the VA system. Each answer revealed new layers of expertise and dedication that had apparently gone unrecognized within the department's existing structure. As their conversation continued, a small crowd of colleagues began gathering at a respectful distance, drawn by curiosity about the extended interaction between a four-star general and someone they had largely ignored for years. For the first time, Sarah was the center of attention in her workplace, though she seemed more focused on explaining her work than on managing the impression she was making. The transformation in the department's atmosphere was palpable. Margaret Chin's carefully planned presentation had been forgotten, replaced by an organic conversation that revealed the true functioning of the office and the remarkable capabilities of someone who had been hiding in plain sight for years. The stage was set for a recognition that would change not only Sarah's trajectory, but the entire department's understanding of what it meant to serve veterans effectively. The conversation between General Williams and Sarah Martinez continued for nearly 30 minutes, an eternity in the context of a scheduled inspection visit. What had begun as a routine stop in the claims processing department had evolved into an in-depth discussion about veterans advocacy, bureaucratic challenges, and innovative approaches to serving those who had served their country. Sarah found herself explaining not just the specific case she was currently handling, but her overall philosophy of veteran services. She described how she approached each claim as a unique story of service and sacrifice, requiring individualized research and advocacy to ensure that veterans received every benefit they had earned. Her passion for this work was evident in every word, and her expertise became increasingly apparent as she discussed complex regulatory interpretations and successful case strategies. General Williams was struck by the depth of Sarah's knowledge and the obvious personal investment she made in every case. As someone who had spent decades in military service, the general understood the challenges veterans faced when transitioning to civilian life and navigating the complex VA benefit system. Sarah's approach demonstrated the kind of understanding and commitment that could genuinely transform veterans' experiences with their government. Margaret Chin's discomfort with the extended conversation was becoming increasingly obvious. She had envisioned a brief, controlled interaction where she could highlight her own management capabilities and maintain oversight of her staff's interactions with the visiting dignitary. Instead, she found herself witnessing a detailed conversation that revealed expertise she had never recognized and dedication she had consistently overlooked. The other staff members in the department had gradually moved closer to observe this unprecedented interaction. For years, they had worked alongside Sarah without truly seeing her contributions or understanding her capabilities. Now, watching a four-star general engage with her as an expert in her field, they were beginning to recognize that they had fundamentally misjudged their colleague. General Williams asked Sarah to show her some examples of successfully resolved cases where her advocacy had made a significant difference in veterans' outcomes. Sarah hesitated for a moment and used to being asked to highlight her own accomplishments, but the general's genuine interest encouraged her to open several case files that demonstrated her impact. The first case involved a Vietnam veteran who had been struggling for years to receive disability compensation for hearing loss and PTSD related to his service as a helicopter crew chief. Sarah had researched the veteran's unit history, tracked down witnesses who could testify to his exposure to combat situations, and compiled medical evidence that established clear connections between his current health problems and his military service. Her thorough documentation and persistent advocacy had resulted in a full disability rating that provided the veteran with significant monthly compensation and access to comprehensive health care. The second case demonstrated Sarah's ability to navigate complex bureaucratic challenges on behalf of veterans with multiple service-connected conditions. A Gulf War veteran suffering from a combination of physical injuries and psychological trauma had been receiving partial disability compensation, but Sarah's research had revealed that his conditions warranted a higher rating. Her detailed analysis of medical evidence and regulatory precedents had resulted in an increased rating that nearly doubled the veteran's monthly compensation. As Sarah described these cases, General Williams noticed several remarkable qualities about her approach. First, her documentation was exceptionally thorough, demonstrating the kind of attention to detail that left no room for administrative challenges or appeals. Second, her understanding of both medical and military contexts allowed her to make connections that others might miss. Finally, her persistence in pursuing positive outcomes for veterans went far beyond basic job requirements. The general asked Sarah about her educational background and training, curious about how someone had developed such expertise in veterans advocacy. Sarah explained her master's degree in social work, her specialized training in trauma counseling, and her continuous self-education about military service and its impacts. She had invested years in developing the knowledge and skills necessary to be truly effective in her role, education that had apparently gone unrecognized by her immediate supervisors. Margaret Chun attempted several times to redirect the conversation toward departmental performance metrics and administrative procedures, but General Williams remained focused on understanding Sarah's work and its impact on veterans' lives. The supervisor's increasing anxiety was obvious to everyone present, as she realized that her carefully planned presentation had been completely overshadowed by a conversation that revealed capabilities she hadn't known existed within her own team. General Williams then asked a question that surprised everyone in the department. She wanted to know about Sarah's ideas for improving the claims processing system. This was not a typical inspection question, but rather an invitation for substantive input on policy and procedure matters that were usually reserved for senior administrators. Sarah's response demonstrated that her expertise extended far beyond individual case management. She had developed comprehensive ideas about systemic improvements that could benefit all veterans navigating the disability claims process. Her suggestions included streamlined documentation requirements, improved coordination between medical and administrative staff, enhanced training programs for claims processors, and technology solutions that could reduce processing times while improving accuracy. These recommendations weren't theoretical concepts developed in isolation. Sarah had been quietly documenting inefficiencies and developing solutions throughout her years of service, creating detailed proposals that could significantly improve the entire system's effectiveness. Her suggestions were practical, well-researched, and demonstrated deep understanding of both veterans' needs and administrative realities. General Williams found herself taking notes as Sarah outlined her improvement recommendations. The breadth and depth of these ideas revealed someone who had been thinking strategically about veterans' services for years, developing insights that could inform policy decisions at the highest levels of the VA system. Yet these valuable perspectives had been completely untapped within the current organizational structure. The conversation revealed that Sarah had been essentially functioning as an informal advocate and case specialist while officially classified as a basic claims processor. Her actual contributions to veterans' welfare far exceeded her job description, and her expertise rivaled that of senior administrators who held much higher positions within the VA hierarchy. As word of the extended conversation spread through the facility, other department heads began arriving to observe the interaction. The sight of a four-star general taking detailed notes while speaking with someone they had never considered a significant contributor was remarkable enough to draw attention from throughout the building. Dr. Robert Harrison, the hospital's chief of staff, arrived to find General Williams engaged in what appeared to be a consultation with Sarah about complex policy matters. His surprise was evident, as he had been prepared to discuss high-level administrative issues with the visiting dignitary, not to witness a substantive conversation with a frontline employee he barely knew existed. The chief medical officer, Dr. Jennifer Brooks, joined the growing audience and immediately recognized the significance of what was happening. As someone who had spent years advocating for better coordination between medical and administrative functions, she was fascinated by Sarah's insights into improving the integration of clinical and bureaucratic processes. General Williams asked Sarah about her experiences working with other departments within the facility, curious about her perspective on interdepartmental coordination and communication. Sarah's response revealed that she had developed working relationships with medical staff, social workers, and financial counselors throughout the facility, creating informal networks that helped her advocate more effectively for veterans' needs. These relationships had developed organically as Sarah sought ways to better serve the veterans whose cases crossed her desk. She had cultivated contacts in medical records, financial aid, housing assistance, and mental health services, creating a comprehensive understanding of the entire range of resources available to veterans. This knowledge allowed her to provide holistic advocacy that addressed veterans' complete situations rather than just their disability claims. Dr. Brooks was particularly impressed by Sarah's understanding of the medical aspects of disability determinations. Her questions about specific conditions and their long-term impacts demonstrated knowledge that rivaled that of clinical staff, expertise she had developed through years of research and collaboration with healthcare providers. General Williams asked Sarah if she had ever considered pursuing advanced positions within the VA system, curious about her career aspirations and whether the organization was effectively developing her obvious talents. Sarah's response revealed that she had applied for several promotional opportunities over the years but had never been selected for advancement, despite her qualifications and demonstrated effectiveness. This information was particularly revealing to General Williams, who recognized the signs of an organization that was failing to identify and develop its most valuable human resources. Sarah's situation represented a systemic problem she had encountered throughout her career. Talented, dedicated individuals whose contributions were overlooked because they didn't fit conventional patterns of visibility and self-promotion. Margaret Chin's growing distress was becoming more apparent as the conversation continued. She had built her career on maintaining control over her department and managing the information that reached higher levels of the organization. The extended interaction between General Williams and Sarah represented a complete bypass of her authority and oversight, revealing capabilities she had failed to recognize and develop. The general began asking more pointed questions about departmental management and support for professional development. Sarah's diplomatic responses revealed a work environment where individual initiative was neither encouraged nor recognized, where expertise was underutilized, and where advancement seemed to depend more on administrative politics than actual effectiveness. Dr. Harrison found himself reassessing his understanding of the facility's human resources and organizational effectiveness. As someone responsible for overall operations, he was beginning to realize that the facility might be sitting on untapped potential that could significantly improve service delivery if properly recognized and utilized. General Williams made a decision that surprised everyone present. She asked Sarah if she would be willing to spend the remainder of the day serving as her guide and consultant for the inspection, providing insights into facility operations from the perspective of someone who understood both administrative processes and veterans' needs. The invitation was unprecedented in the context of facility inspections, but General Williams recognized an opportunity to gain valuable insights while simultaneously highlighting the kind of expertise that should be valued and promoted within the VA system. Sarah's acceptance of this role would mark the beginning of a transformation that would extend far beyond her individual recognition. Margaret Chin's objection was immediate and predictable. She cited department responsibilities, processing deadlines, and the inappropriateness of removing a frontline employee from her regular duties during a busy period. Her response revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of the value Sarah brought to the organization and the opportunity that General Williams was creating. General Williams' response was polite but firm. She explained that understanding frontline operations and perspectives was essential to her inspection mission, and that Sarah's expertise would provide valuable insights that could benefit veterans throughout the VA system. The general's authority made Margaret's objections irrelevant, but the exchange established clear lines about whose judgment would guide the remainder of the visit. As Sarah gathered materials to accompany General Williams on the continued inspection, her colleagues watched with a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and dawning recognition. For the first time in years, someone they had overlooked was being acknowledged for capabilities they had never bothered to notice. The invisible woman was becoming visible in the most dramatic way possible. The transformation had begun, but its full implications were still unfolding. General Williams had identified exceptional talent hidden within the bureaucratic structure, and her recognition of Sarah's value was about to create ripple effects that would challenge assumptions about merit, visibility, and the true meaning of service to veterans. The remainder of General Williams' inspection took on an entirely different character once Sarah Martinez joined as her guide and consultant. What had begun as a routine administrative review transformed into a comprehensive examination of facility operations through the lens of someone who understood both the system's potential and its limitations from a frontline perspective. Sarah's first contribution came during their visit to the Mental Health Services Department, where General Williams had planned to review PTSD treatment programs. Instead of listening to prepared presentations about program statistics and treatment protocols, the general found herself engaged in a substantive discussion about the coordination between mental health services and disability claims processing. Sarah explained how delays in psychological evaluations often created cascading problems for veterans' disability claims, leaving them without financial support while waiting for assessments that could take months to complete. Her insights revealed systemic inefficiencies that weren't captured in standard performance metrics but had significant impacts on veterans' lives and overall treatment outcomes. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the chief of mental health services, was initially surprised to find herself in a three-way conversation with a four-star general and someone she recognized but had never worked with directly. However, as Sarah demonstrated detailed knowledge of mental health treatment protocols and their intersection with benefits administration, Dr. Reynolds began to appreciate the value of this interdisciplinary perspective. Sarah's understanding of psychological trauma and its documentation requirements proved invaluable in identifying opportunities for improvement. She explained how minor changes in evaluation procedures could significantly strengthen veterans' disability claims while simultaneously providing better clinical information for treatment planning. Her suggestions demonstrated the kind of holistic thinking that could improve both administrative efficiency and patient care. General Williams took extensive notes as Sarah outlined specific examples of coordination problems she had encountered in her casework. A veteran suffering from severe PTSD might receive excellent clinical treatment, but struggle to document his condition adequately for disability benefits because the evaluation process wasn't designed to support both clinical and administrative needs simultaneously. The conversation revealed that Sarah had been informally bridging these gaps for years, developing relationships with mental health staff, and learning to translate clinical information into administrative documentation that could support successful benefits claims. Her expertise in both areas had made her an invaluable but unrecognized resource for improving system integration. Dr. Reynolds found herself asking Sarah detailed questions about specific cases and documentation challenges, realizing that this frontline perspective could inform significant improvements in their evaluation procedures. The mental health department had been struggling with lengthy processing times and incomplete documentation, problems that Sarah had been quietly solving through individual advocacy efforts. General Williams observed this interaction with growing appreciation for Sarah's unique value within the organization. Her ability to understand complex systems from multiple perspectives and identify practical solutions demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking typically associated with senior leadership positions. Yet she had been functioning in a basic administrative role. Their next stop was the Medical Records Department, where Sarah's expertise proved equally valuable. She explained how inconsistencies in medical documentation created challenges for disability claims while also identifying opportunities to improve information sharing between clinical and administrative functions. The medical records supervisor, Janet Walsh, had worked with Sarah on numerous occasions but had never fully appreciated the breadth of her knowledge about documentation standards and regulatory requirements. As Sarah explained specific examples of how improved record-keeping could benefit both patient care and benefits administration, Janet began to understand the strategic value of their collaboration. Sarah's recommendations for the Medical Records Department were both practical and innovative. She suggested standardized documentation templates that would ensure clinical notes contained information necessary for disability evaluations, reducing the need for additional assessments, and speeding up the benefits process for veterans. General Williams was impressed by Sarah's ability to identify systemic improvements that could benefit multiple stakeholder groups simultaneously. Her suggestions weren't limited to solving immediate problems, but addressed underlying structural issues that affected the entire facility's effectiveness in serving veterans. The inspection continued to the Financial Counseling Department, where Sarah's insights into the intersection of benefits administration and financial planning proved equally valuable. She explained how delays in disability determinations created cascading financial problems for veterans, and how improved coordination between departments could mitigate these challenges. Michael Torres, the chief financial counselor, had occasionally worked with Sarah on complex cases but had never recognized her comprehensive understanding of the entire benefit system and its impact on veterans' financial stability. Her recommendations for improving coordination between his department and claims processing revealed opportunities for significant improvements in service delivery. As they moved through different departments, a pattern emerged that impressed General Williams tremendously. Sarah had developed expertise that spanned the entire facility's operations, understanding how various functions interconnected and identifying opportunities for improvement that individual departments might never recognize working in isolation. Her knowledge wasn't theoretical or based solely on policy documents. Sarah had developed practical understanding through years of frontline work, learning how different systems actually functioned and where their limitations created problems for the veterans they were supposed to serve. General Williams began asking department heads to explain their current challenges and then inviting Sarah to provide her perspective on potential solutions. The results were consistently impressive, as Sarah demonstrated ability to see problems from multiple angles and suggest practical approaches that addressed underlying causes rather than just symptoms. The Housing Assistance Department provided another example of Sarah's comprehensive expertise. She explained how delays in disability benefits determinations created homelessness risks for veterans, and how better coordination between benefits processing and housing assistance could prevent crisis situations. Sarah's recommendations weren't limited to administrative procedures. She had researched community resources, federal programs, and private assistance options that could provide comprehensive support for veterans facing housing challenges. Her knowledge base extended far beyond her official job responsibilities, reflecting years of personal research and commitment to serving veterans effectively. Dr. Harrison, who had been observing these interactions throughout the day, found himself completely reassessing his understanding of the facility's human resources and operational potential. Sarah's expertise represented capabilities that could transform service delivery if properly recognized and utilized, yet she had been functioning essentially invisibly within the current organizational structure. General Williams asked Sarah to provide her overall assessment of the facility's strengths and areas for improvement from the perspective of someone who worked across departmental boundaries. Her response was comprehensive, balanced, and demonstrated strategic thinking that impressed everyone present. Sarah identified the facility's commitment to veteran care as its greatest strength, noting that individual staff members throughout the organization were genuinely dedicated to serving those who had served their country. However, she also explained how structural limitations and poor coordination between departments often prevented this dedication from achieving its full potential. Her recommendations for improvement focused on enhanced communication systems, standardized procedures that supported both clinical and administrative functions, professional development opportunities that would help staff better understand the complete veteran experience, and recognition systems that would identify and promote expertise regardless of conventional visibility markers. The depth and practicality of Sarah's recommendations impressed General Williams, who recognized the kind of institutional knowledge and strategic thinking that could drive significant organizational improvements. Her perspective represented exactly the kind of frontline expertise that senior leaders needed to understand in order to make informed decisions about policies and procedures. As the inspection day continued, word spread throughout the facility about the remarkable interaction taking place between General Williams and the previously invisible Sarah Martinez. Staff members who had worked alongside Sarah for years began viewing her with new understanding and respect, recognizing capabilities they had somehow failed to notice despite working together daily. Margaret Chin spent the day in increasing distress, realizing that her failure to recognize and develop Sarah's expertise reflected poorly on her management capabilities. Her attempts to maintain control over the situation had been politely but firmly dismissed by General Williams, leaving her to observe the revelation of talent she should have identified and promoted years earlier. The Chief of Staff began making inquiries about Sarah's employment history, performance evaluations, and applications for advancement, curious about how someone with such obvious expertise had remained in a basic administrative position for so long. The answers he received revealed a pattern of overlooked potential and missed opportunities that troubled him deeply. Dr. Brooks approached Sarah during a break in the inspection to express her amazement at the breadth of her knowledge about medical aspects of veterans' care. She explained that Sarah's understanding of clinical conditions and their documentation requirements exceeded that of many healthcare professionals, and she wondered why such expertise hadn't been recognized and utilized more effectively. Sarah's response was characteristically modest, explaining that she had simply tried to learn whatever was necessary to serve veterans effectively. She had never considered her knowledge particularly remarkable, viewing it instead as the natural result of taking her job responsibilities seriously and caring about the outcomes for the people she served. This conversation revealed another dimension of the systemic problems General Williams was documenting. Organizations often failed to recognize exceptional performance when it didn't fit conventional patterns of visibility and self-promotion. Sarah's expertise had developed quietly and persistently, focused entirely on service delivery rather than career advancement, making it invisible to supervisors who were looking for different indicators of potential. General Williams concluded the inspection day with a private meeting that included Dr. Harrison, Dr. Brooks, and Sarah. She explained that her assessment of the facility had been significantly enhanced by Sarah's insights and that she intended to include recommendations about better recognition and utilization of frontline expertise in her official report. The general asked Sarah directly about her career aspirations and what kind of role would allow her to maximize her contributions to veteran services. Sarah's response revealed that she had never really considered the possibility that her expertise might qualify her for advanced positions, having internalized the organization's apparent assessment of her value. This conversation marked a turning point not just for Sarah, but for the entire facility's approach to talent recognition and development. General Williams was preparing to challenge fundamental assumptions about how organizations identify and promote their most valuable contributors, using Sarah's situation as a compelling example of systemic problems that needed to be addressed. As the day concluded, Sarah found herself in a position she had never experienced, being valued and recognized for her actual capabilities rather than being overlooked despite her contributions. The transformation was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid for changes that would extend far beyond her individual situation to benefit veterans throughout the system. The invisible woman had become visible, and the implications of that recognition were about to reshape not only her own career, but the entire organization's understanding of what it meant to identify and develop excellence in service to those who had served their country. 3 weeks after General Williams' inspection visit, Sarah Martinez walked into the Richmond, Virginia Medical Center to find her professional world completely transformed. The woman who had spent years invisible to her colleagues now found herself at the center of organizational changes that extended far beyond her individual recognition. The General's inspection report had created significant ripples throughout the VA system, with Sarah's situation serving as a prominent example of how traditional organizational structures could overlook exceptional talent. General Williams had presented Sarah's expertise and contributions as a model for the kind of frontline innovation that should be identified, recognized, and promoted throughout veteran services. Sarah's first indication of change came in the form of a meeting request from Dr. Harrison, the facility's chief of staff. She had never been invited to meet with senior leadership before, and the prospect filled her with both excitement and anxiety. Years of invisibility had not prepared her for direct engagement with the people who made strategic decisions about the facility's operations. The meeting took place in Dr. Harrison's executive conference room, a space Sarah had never entered during her years of employment. Present were Dr. Harrison, Dr. Brooks, Janet Walsh from Medical Records, Dr. Reynolds from Mental Health, and several other department heads she recognized but had never worked with directly. Dr. Harrison began by acknowledging that General Williams' report had highlighted significant opportunities for improving coordination between departments and better utilizing existing expertise within the facility. He explained that Sarah's insights during the inspection had revealed possibilities for enhancement that senior leadership had not previously recognized. The purpose of the meeting, Dr. Harrison explained, was to discuss the creation of a new position that would formalize Sarah's role as an interdepartmental liaison and Veterans Advocacy Coordinator. This position would leverage her comprehensive understanding of the facility's operations and her proven effectiveness in navigating complex bureaucratic challenges on behalf of veterans. Sarah listened with amazement as the department heads described their recognition of her expertise and their desire to create organizational structures that would maximize her contributions. The same people who had overlooked her for years were now acknowledging capabilities they had somehow failed to notice despite working in the same facility. Dr. Brooks explained that the mental health department was particularly interested in formalizing coordination with benefits administration, recognizing that Sarah's understanding of both clinical and administrative requirements could significantly improve service delivery for veterans with psychological trauma. She had developed detailed proposals for integration that built directly on Sarah's recommendations during the inspection. Janet Walsh described similar opportunities in medical records, where Sarah's expertise and documentation requirements could help establish procedures that would support both patient care and benefits administration more effectively. Her informal consultations with the Medical Records Department had already begun improving their processes in ways that benefited veterans throughout the facility. The Financial Counseling Department had developed proposals for enhanced coordination that would help veterans navigate the complex intersection of disability benefits, healthcare coverage, and financial planning. Michael Torres explained that Sarah's understanding of the complete benefits system made her an invaluable resource for developing comprehensive support strategies. As the department heads outlined their proposals, Sarah began to understand that her years of invisible contribution had actually created a foundation for systematic improvements that could benefit thousands of veterans. Her individual advocacy efforts had revealed opportunities for organizational enhancement that could be scaled up to improve service delivery throughout the facility. Dr. Harrison explained that the new position would carry significant responsibilities and authority, including oversight of interdepartmental coordination, development of improved procedures for veteran services, and liaison responsibilities with regional VA offices for policy implementation and improvement recommendations. The salary and benefits package associated with the position represented a dramatic improvement over Sarah's current compensation, reflecting the senior-level responsibilities and the value the organization was placing on her expertise. More importantly, the position would provide the authority and resources necessary to implement the kind of systematic improvements she had been quietly advocating for years. Sarah's acceptance of the position was immediate and wholehearted. The opportunity to formalize her advocacy efforts and create systematic improvements for veterans represented the fulfillment of aspirations she had barely allowed herself to consider during her years of invisibility. The announcement of Sarah's promotion created significant buzz throughout the facility. Colleagues who had overlooked her for years found themselves reassessing their own understanding of merit, recognition, and the indicators of professional value. Her transformation from invisible employee to senior coordinator challenged assumptions about how organizations identify and develop talent. Margaret Chen's reaction to these developments was complex and revealing. As Sarah's immediate supervisor, she was forced to confront her failure to recognize and develop obvious talent within her own department. Her management approach, which had focused on control and appearances rather than substance and development, was now under scrutiny from senior leadership. The irony was not lost on anyone that Margaret had spent years supervising someone whose expertise exceeded her own understanding of veteran services. Her attempts to manage the situation by claiming credit for Sarah's development were transparent and unsuccessful, further highlighting the disconnect between her self-perception and her actual effectiveness as a leader. Sarah's first weeks in her new position involved a comprehensive review of facility operations from her unique perspective of someone who understood how different departments actually functioned and where improvements could be implemented. Her recommendations were detailed, practical, and demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that impressed senior leadership throughout the VA system. General Williams maintained contact with Sarah during this transition period, serving as an informal mentor and advisor as she adapted to her new responsibilities. The General's continued interest in Sarah's development reflected her commitment to ensuring that the recognition she had initiated would translate into genuine opportunities for professional growth and contribution. The changes in Sarah's professional situation also created personal transformation. Years of invisibility had eroded her confidence and social connections, but her new position required her to engage with colleagues as an equal and to represent the facility in regional meetings and policy discussions. Sarah found herself attending conferences and policy meetings where her expertise was valued and her opinions were sought by senior administrators throughout the VA system. Her transformation from invisible employee to recognized expert became a model for identifying and developing talent that had been overlooked within traditional organizational structures. The facility's performance metrics began improving significantly as Sarah's recommendations were implemented. Processing times for disability claims decreased, coordination between departments improved, and veteran satisfaction scores increased measurably. These improvements validated the value of recognizing and utilizing expertise regardless of its conventional visibility within organizational hierarchies. Sarah's success in her new position also created opportunities for other employees whose contributions had been undervalued or overlooked. Her example encouraged a more comprehensive examination of talent throughout the facility, leading to the identification and promotion of several other individuals whose capabilities had not been fully recognized. Dr. Harrison implemented new procedures for talent identification and development that were designed to prevent the kind of oversight that had kept Sarah invisible for so long. These procedures emphasized substance over style, looking for evidence of actual effectiveness and expertise rather than conventional indicators of leadership potential. The changes at the Richmond, Virginia Medical Center began attracting attention from other facilities throughout the system, with Sarah's story becoming a case study in organizational improvement and talent development. Her transformation from invisible employee to senior coordinator demonstrated the potential benefits of looking beyond traditional markers of professional value. Sarah's new role also provided opportunities to address systemic problems she had observed throughout her years of frontline service. Her recommendations for policy improvements were forwarded to regional and national VA offices, where her expertise and credibility earned respect from senior administrators and policymakers. 6 months after General Williams' inspection visit, Sarah found herself presenting policy recommendations to a congressional subcommittee on Veterans Affairs. The woman who had been invisible to her own colleagues was now testifying before federal legislators about improvements that could benefit veterans throughout the country. Her testimony focused on the importance of recognizing and utilizing frontline expertise in developing policies and procedures for veterans services. She explained how frontline employees often developed insights and solutions that could significantly improve service delivery if organizational structures existed to identify and implement their recommendations. The congressional testimony marked a complete transformation in Sarah's professional trajectory. From invisible employee processing claims in a forgotten corner of a VA facility, she had become a recognized expert whose insights were valued at the highest levels of Veterans Affairs Administration. Sarah's personal life also underwent significant changes as her professional confidence and social connections expanded. She began developing friendships with colleagues who now recognized her value, and her increased salary allowed her to pursue interests and activities that had been financially out of reach during her years of underemployment. The apartment that had felt like temporary shelter became a home as Sarah invested in furnishings and personal touches that reflected her growing sense of stability and belonging. Her social isolation gradually gave way to meaningful relationships with people who appreciated her expertise and valued her friendship. General Williams continued to follow Sarah's progress, taking personal satisfaction in the recognition and development of talent that had been hidden within the system. Their relationship evolved into a professional mentorship that provided Sarah with guidance and advocacy as she navigated her expanded responsibilities. The transformation that began with General Williams' recognition of Sarah's expertise created lasting changes throughout the Richmond, Virginia Medical Center and beyond. Sarah's example demonstrated the potential benefits of looking beyond conventional indicators of professional value to identify and develop talent that might otherwise remain invisible. As Sarah reflected on her journey from invisible employee to recognized expert, she understood that her experience represented more than personal advancement. Her story had become a catalyst for organizational improvements that would benefit countless veterans and serve as a model for recognizing excellence in public service. The woman who had been overlooked by all had not only found recognition but had become an agent of change whose impact would extend far beyond her individual situation. Her transformation proved that genuine service and expertise, even when invisible to others, could ultimately create positive change that honored both the server and those served.